Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, Algeria celebrates today the National Day of War Veteran, making the double anniversary of the offensive of north of Constantine and the Sommam Congress. The Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Salah Goujil, affirmed that the massive participation of Algerian people in the presidential election of September 7th will constitute a strong message. As the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Egypt to try and pave the way for the conclusion of a ceasefire in Gaza, the Israeli aircraft pursued their pounding of the enclave, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. In a message on the occasion of the National Day of the War Veteran, the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has said that the North Constantine Offensive and the holding of Sommam Congress are immortalized in the history of the glorious Liberation Revolution. The President of the Republic recalled that these two events gave a lesson to a colonial army that was betting on stifling the popular revolution with the force, praising on the same occasion the great sacrifices of Algerian martyrs who gave the revolution a boost that uplifted the spirit of the National Liberation Army.
The Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Salah Goujil, said that the North Constantine Offensive was the second and the main stop in the history of the revolution that contributed to creating a broad popular support. Asya Bekar.
This came in an interview broadcast by the Algerian television on the eve of the National Day of the War Veteran, marking the double anniversary of the offensive of north of Constantine and the Sommam Congress.
August 20th represents the offensive of the north of Constantine, and the Sommam Congress represents the first stage of the First November War. 10 months later, that is to say between the August 20th, 1955 and 56, the War of Liberation was concentrated essentially in the Ouras region for well-known reasons. When the national movement decided to freeze the secret organization, the only one who refused this was Mustafa Ben Bour'id. With the advent of November, the first during the period ranging from 1950 to 54, the brothers in arms who fled towards other destinations in order not to be captured by the French colonization joined the Ouras.
The Speaker of the Council of the Nation affirmed that the massive participation of the Algerian people in the presidential election of September 7th will constitute a strong message to Algeria's enemies abroad. He said Algeria is targeted today because she is attached to its revolutionary principles, in particular the principle of non-alignment and its defense of just causes in the world. He praised the attachment of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, to preserving national sovereignty and strengthening political and economic independence within the framework of the new Algeria. Mr. Goujil seized the opportunity to express support for Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune for the continuation of his missions for a second term. He also praised the role of the National People's Army in preserving national sovereignty thanks to their high level of vigilance. Meanwhile, he indicated that the Sommam Congress contributed to the organization of the revolution, the formation of its leadership and the definition of responsibilities which led to important decisions that were concretized at the Cairo Conference in 1957. Meanwhile, Mr. Goujil spoke about the Sahrawi cause, stressing that it will remain a decolonization issue registered at the UN, emphasizing the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination.
On the occasion of the celebration of the National Day of the War Veteran, the Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Brahim Boughali, said the double anniversary of the North Constantine Offensive and the Sommam Congress connect Algeria's past to its present. On the same occasion, the Chief of Staff of the National People's Army, Army General Sai Cheng-ri, has said fulfilling the national duty towards the homeland requires men who know how to recognize the sacrifices of their ancestors and who are proud of the glorious history of their nation. On the sixth day of the election campaign, the candidates of the September 7th presidential election have focused their interventions on economic issues of concern to the public, emphasizing the need to build a strong economy supported by genuine local development. More details with my colleague Mariam Bashi.
Candidate of the Socialist Forces Front, FFS, Mr. Youssef Aouchiche, stressed during an outreach activity in Lakhdariya Bouira that Algeria has all the human and natural resources it needs to build a strong and diversified economy. If elected president, he pledged to introduce immediate measures to preserve the purchasing power and dignity of the citizens. The proposals include raising the guaranteed minimum wage SNMG to 14,000 Algerian dinar and introducing allowances for the unemployed and housewives. He also highlighted other proposals for resolving problems in the education, health and justice sectors, among others. Mr. Aouchiche reiterated his appeal to citizens to go to the polls to elect their candidate, stressing that the citizen remains the keystone of change. For his part, the Secretary General of the National Liberation Front, FLN, Abdelkarim Ben Barek, stressed at a rally in Tizi Ouzou that the program of the independent candidates Abdelmajid Tebboune, which aims to strengthen the balance of development between the regions, provides for the revision of the constituencies and provincial codes to give local elected representatives more prerogatives. Mr. Ben Barek also said that the candidate backed by the FLN is committed in his program to pursuing social policy, reducing inflation, and working to improve the purchasing power, stressing that the policy of developing the agricultural sector to ensure food self-sufficiency, notably in strategic sectors such as cereal, has proved its effectiveness. Instead, the leader of Al-Fajr Al-Jadid party, Tahar Ben Baibish, said he was supporting the independent candidate Abdelmajid Tebboune because it was the same program put forward by his party, notably with regard to the fight against corruption, the recovery of stolen property, and the major interest given to social issues, as well as support for the agriculture and the Palestinian and Sahrawi causes. The Secretary General of the National Democratic Rally, Mustafa Yahyi, and the President of the movement Al-Bina, Abdelkader Ben Grina, also called in Hannaba and Khanshla, respectively, for a vote in favor of the independent candidate Abdelmajid Tebboune to enable him to consolidate the political, social and economic gains achieved during his first term. Meanwhile, Mr. Ibrahim Marad, campaign manager for the independent candidate Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, chaired a coordination meeting attended by political parties supporting Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune to coordinate efforts and programs of activities to be organized during the election campaign. At a meeting in Jalfa, the candidate of the Movement of the Society for Peace, MSP, Mr. Abdelali Hassani Sharif, emphasized the need to examine the administrative mapping in order to boost local development, suggesting the abolition of the administrative constituency, or daira, which he described as a bureaucratic apparatus hindering development. He explained that the revision of the administrative mapping is aimed at urbanizing uninhabited regions and developing them while giving elected representatives the possibility of taking the initiative to carry out projects for the benefit of the inhabitants of these regions, which is in the line with the decentralization of development and the creation of wealth. He also considered necessary the creation of a ministry responsible for planning and prospective to work out development plans and ensure the equitable distribution of wealth. The MSP candidate, for whom the province of Jalfa represents an important economic pool project, revealed his economic and development approach based on the implementation of mega projects in sectors such as agriculture, industry, energy, transport, health and services.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has received a telephone call from the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Republic of Lebanon, a sister country, Mr. Abdullah Bou Habib. A communiqué issued by the ministry indicated that on the occasion, the Lebanese minister expressed the thanks and gratitude of his country's authorities to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, for his solidarity and support for Lebanon during the difficult times it is going through his decision to supply it with fuel to run its power stations, stressing that such a valuable initiative has been greatly appreciated and widely echoed by all the components of the Lebanese people. The Lebanese minister, who also expressed his sincere thanks and appreciation for Algeria's efforts at the United Nations Security Council to defend the position's vital interests and territorial sovereignty of Lebanon in the face of repeated Israeli aggression on its territory. Back to you, Jamal.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. This is the English service. More news. A humanitarian aid has been delivered from the Boufarik Air Base in Blida on board 4 military aircraft belonging to the Algerian Air Force to Niger following the floods that hit the country recently. The details with Majid Mila.
A communiqué issued by the Ministry of National Defense indicated that in line with the principles of cooperation and humanitarian solidarity with brotherly and friendly countries, and following the recent devastating floods in Niger, humanitarian aid was sent on board 4 military planes. The aid provided by the Algerian Red Crescent includes food, medicine and medical equipment, as well as other required items to Niamey Airport. Evoking the aid, the president of the Algerian Red Crescent, Ibtissam Hamlawi, had this to say.
In implementation of the instructions of the President of the Republic, as Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, we have delivered a package of humanitarian aid on board 4 Algerian Air Force aircraft to the sister country, the Republic of Niger. The aid includes medicine, mattresses, blankets, tents and foodstuffs.
The humanitarian operation reaffirmed once again the commitment of the People's National Army to support all the humanitarian initiatives and reiterated its constant dedication to carrying out such noble missions.
Now, the Minister of National Solidarity, Family and Women's Affairs, Kautar Krikou, has received the representative of the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, in Algeria, Katarina Johnson, here in Algiers. During the meeting, Ms. Krikou highlighted Algeria's experience in caring for children, notably in terms of discovering and supporting creative and innovative children, as well as educational care for people with special needs, affirming that coordination with UNICEF will continue to be strengthened in the best interests of the child. For her part, Ms. Johnson praised the sector's efforts in caring for children, noting the effectiveness of the coordination between the national solidarity sector and other sectors, notably in national education and vocational training, in providing support for people with special needs, efforts which have produced positive results in achieving the socio-economic integration of this category. Now, as the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Egypt to try and pave the way for the conclusion of a ceasefire in Gaza, the Israeli aircraft pursued their pounding of the enclave, killing and wounding scores of Palestinians. Palestinian sources affirm that at least 12 people, including 2 children, were killed in airstrikes carried out against a school sheltering thousands of displaced in the town of Gaza. A similar attack perpetrated early this month claimed 93 lives, triggering off a worldwide condemnation. Earlier, the news agency Wafa stressed that at least 34 people were killed and more than 100 wounded in the Israeli bombardments that targeted various parts of the territory. This came as the UN Coordination Office for Humanitarian Affairs warned against the continued deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, notably on account of the repeated displacement of the population, insecurity, and the collapse of vital infrastructure. In a similar move, the European Union warned that for the past 10 months there were a visible and serious deterioration of the living conditions of the Palestinians. In a joint communique, both the EU diplomacy chief Josep Borrell and the commissioner in charge of the management of crises and the humanitarian aid, Yanez Linarcissi, said they feared year 2024 would be as much tragic as 2023, considered the deadliest year for the humanitarian workers. In the meantime, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is on his 9th tour of the region, is striving to make progress and secure a ceasefire deal. Evoking the obstacles still hampering the conclusion of the ceasefire, the Hamas movement's representative here in Algiers had this to say.
Following what we have heard from the negotiations mediators, we in the Hamas movement have confirmed that Netanyahu is the one blocking a ceasefire by imposing new conditions with the aim of dealing a blow to the efforts of the mediators and extending the war for a longer time. The new proposal meets the conditions of Netanyahu and goes in line with his vision, especially in terms of his rejection of a permanent ceasefire, the total withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and his insistence on continuing the occupation of the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor, imposing new conditions to the prisoners exchange deal and renouncing other terms aimed to hamper a prisoners exchange deal and ceasefire deal. We in the Hamas movement believe that the U.S. administration is responsible for his political maneuvering and the misleading of the public opinion. Netanyahu is fully responsible for hampering the efforts of the mediators and preventing a ceasefire deal. He is also responsible for his prisoners who are facing the same danger as our Palestinian people due to the pursuit of his aggression and the deliberate targeting of all life facilities in the Gaza Strip. We in the Hamas movement are committed to what we have agreed upon on July 2nd based on the decision of President Biden. The United Nations Security Council, we call on the mediators to shoulder their responsibility to force the Israeli occupation to implement the agreed upon decisions.
That was the Hamas movement's representative here in Algiers, Youssef Hamdan. Back to you.
Thank you, Jamal. As the 10th Conference of States Parties to the Arms Trade Treaty started in Geneva, Switzerland, human rights group called for an end to arms transfer to the Israeli occupation and said that unlawful deeds have led to devastating loss of life in Gaza, Sudan and Myanmar. Asia Bekar.
Amnesty International has called for an end to arms transfer to countries including the Israeli occupation, Sudan and Myanmar, saying they cause devastating loss of life and contravene the Arms Trade Treaty, the parties to which are meeting now in Geneva, Switzerland. Amnesty International has said in a statement that it's time for state parties to live up to their legal obligations and fully implement the Arms Trade Treaty to prohibit the flow of arms to countries when it's known they would be used for genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, or if it could be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international human rights or humanitarian law. Amnesty called the transfer of arms to the Israeli occupation a stark example of the government's failure to comply with the Arms Trade Treaty, adding that though the U.S. is not a state party, as a signatory, it has a duty not to undermine the treaty's object and purpose. An Amnesty International researcher has said that states, parties and signatories, including the U.S., the largest provider of arms to the Israeli occupation, continue to license arms transfer to the Israeli occupation in spite of overwhelming evidence of war crimes committed by the Israeli occupying forces. The United Nations Treaty was signed by over 100 countries in 2013 and went into effect in 2014.
A senior UN official in Somalia has called on all the parties to protect civilians and humanitarian workers in the country's conflict zones. Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary General, Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator for Somalia, George Conway, said the country recorded 124 incidents affecting humanitarian access in 2024, with 12 aid workers injured and 13 incidents of physical assault, harassment and intimidation. Following close consultations held on humanitarian personnel worldwide, the permanent representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations and President of the Security Council for this month, Michael Imran Kamu, had the following.
Council members expressed their deep appreciation to humanitarian workers around the world. They discussed the challenges and risks that humanitarian personnel continue to experience worldwide and deplored that 2023 was the deadliest year in the history for aid workers and expressed concern that if the international community fails them, we fail everyone who is in need of humanitarian aid. They also expressed their deep concern about the particular vulnerability of national and locally recruited humanitarian personnel. Council members also reiterated the obligation of states and parties to armed conflict to fully respect international humanitarian law, including respecting and protecting humanitarian workers, and call for safe and unhindered humanitarian access to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid.
Let's recall that the Arab League has called for urgent aid to deal with the difficult humanitarian conditions in the Gaza Strip ravaged by genocidal Israeli war in Sudan and the disaster caused by torrents and floods in the Yemeni governorates of Hodeidah and Hajjah.
The special envoy, or the U.S. special envoy, Tom Perriello, has said that the Sudan peace talks in Switzerland are focused on opening 3 humanitarian corridors to deliver desperately needed food and medicine to the war-torn country. Perriello told an online briefing from the Geneva that the key Adre crossing from Chad could open as early as today, Tuesday, with 100 trucks already waiting at the border. He said the first priorities was to look at how to open 3 roads that collectively would ensure that 20 million people who are currently cut off completely or largely from food and medicine would be able to get that relief. Now, the Democratic National Convention's first night showcased speeches from the last Democrat to lose to Donald Trump and the last one to beat him. Hillary Clinton spoke hopefully of finally breaking the glass ceiling to elect a female president. Joe Biden laced into Trump and directly acknowledged the concerns of protesters against the war in Gaza who demonstrated a few blocks from the convention hall. President Joe Biden wrapped up the convention's opening night by beginning his long political farewell with an address that both framed his own legacy and signaled he was ready to start ceding control to the party to Vice President Kamala Harris. You are still listening to Radio Algeria International, and this is the English service.